This video will explore another of the important themes in Shakespeare's play Macbeth: violence. Violence can be defined as an extreme use of verbal or physical force, used to harm, threaten, intimidate, or kill another person or group of people. The play Macbeth is a tragedy which features an extreme level of violence, mirroring the brutality of Shakespeare's own time and the medieval world in which it is set. The protagonist, Macbeth, is driven both by the mysterious prophecies of the witches and the manipulation of his wife, and takes the throne of Scotland by murdering his once beloved king in cold blood to serve his uncontrolled ambition for power. However, as Macbeth later laments himself in the metaphor, "Blood will have blood," his first act of violence is a catalyst for a cycle of violence driven by fear, insanity, and a lust for power which throws all of Scotland into chaos and leads to Macbeth's eventual violent death, as the courageous Thane Macduff takes vengeance on Macbeth for ordering the slaughter of Macduff's own family. In creating a play where violence and treason is centre stage in many scenes, Shakespeare mirrors the troubled times he witnessed in Jacobean England. The play was written in the aftermath of the Gunpowder Plot of November 1605, where Catholic plotters planned to blow up the Houses of Parliament, kill King James I, and replace him with a Catholic monarch. The plan was foiled and the plotters were tortured and horribly executed. Shakespeare alludes to the Gunpowder Plot in the play's critical view of Macbeth's violent ascension to the throne. In the end, he is rejected as a bloody tyrant, and the true succession is restored. Shakespeare's intention is to instill confidence in the true monarchy and criticise the self-serving, blasphemous ambition of plotters against the throne. Now let's explore some of the key scenes and quotations which link to the theme of violence in Macbeth. Following the mysterious opening with the witches on the heath, King Duncan receives a report from a wounded captain of a fierce and bloody battle in defence of his kingdom from a Scottish rebel named Macdonald and an army of Norwegian invaders. The captain reports on the battle in gory detail, hailing Macbeth's skill in battle in the lines, "Till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops, and fixed his head upon our battlements." This graphic imagery presents Macbeth slicing Macdonald in half from the stomach to the head, presumably with a furious uppercut, which emphasises Macbeth's impressive and brutal skill with a sword. To a modern audience, Macbeth's actions may seem savage, but this is medieval Scotland, and Duncan praises Macbeth as "worthy gentleman," signalling the appropriateness of bloody violence in service to king and country. So at the beginning, Macbeth is established as a fearsome and mighty warrior whose violence serves the crown. However, once Macbeth receives the prophecies of the witches, Shakespeare quickly reveals this heroic warrior is capable of violent thoughts which are far less acceptable. In a dramatic aside, Macbeth questions if the witches' intentions are good or evil. He questions, "If good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs?" Clearly suggesting that the prophecies have awakened in his mind violent thoughts of killing the king. The audience is asked to picture what horrible images could make Macbeth's hair stand on end and his heart beat frantically. This foreshadows Macbeth's brutal murder of the king and reveals Macbeth's mind is capable of a worse, immoral violence very different from that he displays on the battlefield. While Macbeth clearly is capable of great acts of violence, it is the violence of Lady Macbeth's words which push him over the edge and overcome his previous resistance to committing treason. In what is probably the most shocking and brutal use of imagery in the play, Lady Macbeth conjures an horrific image of herself destroying her own child in the lines, "I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out." She claims she would be willing to do the unthinkable, tear away a child nursing at her breast and murder it by smashing its brain to pieces. Here Shakespeare uses a tender image of motherhood and juxtaposes it with a monstrous image of violence, which presents Lady Macbeth as a cruel and heartless manipulator. She uses violent language to shame her husband into murdering the king. This kind of violent expression was designed to horrify the audience, and even today, the imagery proves to be a sickening and shocking example of how violence twists the mind. After murdering Duncan, Macbeth is shaken and disturbed to the point of bewilderment by the violent act he has committed. Macbeth fixates on a voice he thought he heard in his head, which cries, "Sleep no more. Macbeth doth murder sleep," which implies he is either beginning to lose his sanity, or else listening in to some divine judgment for his sins. Sleep is a motif or repeating symbol in the play, which links to the theme of guilt. Sleep can be seen as a symbol of innocence. In a duplicitous and cowardly act, Macbeth murders Duncan as he sleeps. So Macbeth's fearful ramblings about sleep suggests he sees this act of violence as different from his killing on the battlefield. While the former actions were acts of service, this cold-blooded murder will haunt him for eternity. Following Macbeth's ascension to the throne, Macbeth's actions become dominated by fear and violence, a sign of his cursed nature and ungodly rule over Scotland. Macbeth cannot rest and declares to Lady Macbeth in a moment of fury, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." The metaphor expresses Macbeth's violent inner thoughts, with the scorpions symbolically representing the enemies who would kill him. This paranoia leads him to have his once trusted friend Banquo murdered. Shakespeare displays Macbeth's state of mind as unravelling in Act 3, as his character's violent acts escalate. After the murder of Banquo, Macbeth hosts a banquet for the Scottish thanes, where he is haunted by the gory image of Banquo's ghost, which can be interpreted as a symbol of his own guilty conscience, chastising him for his malevolent behaviour. The ghost appears to Macbeth 3 times during the banquet, and Macbeth wails frantically at it, disturbing the other guests before Lady Macbeth sends them home. As the scene draws to a close, Macbeth utters the resigned comment, "It will have blood. They say blood will have blood," metaphorically suggesting that the bloody and violent crimes they are responsible for will only lead to more killing. It foreshadows the cycle of revenge and murder that follows, suggesting that more violence is the inevitable result of violent acts. As the play draws into its final act, Macbeth seems to lose any sense of humanity. He has ordered the murder of Macduff's family and is about to defend his castle against the invading army led by Lord Syward, Malcolm, and Macduff. In a sense, the events of the play come full circle, as Macbeth returns to the battlefield to meet his fate. This time, however, he takes on the mantle of violent traitor instead of MacDonald. Following the news that the army, shrouded with trees cut from Burnham Wood, approaches the castle, Macbeth cries, "Blow, wind! Come, rack! At least we'll die with harness on our back." Here the word harness denotes armour, which symbolically suggests there is honour in death as a soldier. Macbeth does indeed die in combat, slain by Macduff, who returns his head to Malcolm in the final scene. A bloody and violent end, which signals the futility of Macbeth's reign as king, and serves as a warning to would-be traitors of the consequences of murder and treason.